afternoon, everybody. This is Kristen Bogdonis. I'll be leading the presentation today. And I'm going to give you one more minute to get some people logged in here. So we can start with introductions. Again, my name is Kristen, and I'm the Nutrition and Wellness Educator, the University of Illinois Extension in the service area of Henry, Mercer, Rock Island, and Stark counties. And the areas I spend a lot of my time in is with chronic disease prevention and management, food safety, and food preservation. I do a lot of hands-on canning classes in the summer and fall, so I'm looking forward to those. And also with me today is Diane Reinhold. She is the Nutrition and Wellness Educator in Northwestern Illinois. So Diane, would you like to say anything before we get started?
Hi, good afternoon. We're super excited to have you joining us today. We ask that all participants please keep their microphones and videos turned off. This will help optimize the viewing experience for everyone. And if you have any questions, we ask that you please type them into the chat box and we will address those at the end of today's presentation. And then also I just want to let everyone know these series are running from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. East or Central Time. So if there's some confusion over the time, hopefully your meetings all say that they are for Central Time. So Kristen, we are looking forward to this presentation today, and I'll let you proceed.
Thank you very much, Diane. I'm excited to be here. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is Food Rescue at Home. These are the topics that we will be covering today in the presentation. We have status of food waste in the United States, impacts of wasted food. We'll cover lots of different strategies that you can use at home to divert some of that waste. And I'll also go over some additional resources that I would like to send you following the presentation. And again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those in the chat box as they come up. And Diane will keep an eye on those and we will get to those at the end.
Hey, Kristen, before we get too far into our presentation, do you want to go ahead and set up our first poll question?
Absolutely, thanks for the reminder. Okay, so we have 3 poll questions for you today. The first one is, let's launch this here. It is how many people, including yourself, are watching today's webinar? Diane, are you able to see this?
Yes, how about if I go ahead and start the poll from my end?
Okay, thank you, that would be great. Because we realize some families might be tuning in today, so we would like to have an accurate count for our records.
So if everyone can go ahead and click on how many people, including yourself, are watching today's presentation. So go ahead and click, and then we will keep those questions coming. And actually, Kristen, all of the questions have been posted. So we're going to go ahead and collect all of this data at one time.
Okay.
And we're going to give people just a few more minutes to go ahead and please answer those poll questions. All right, looks like there's about 124 people online today, and so far we have about 21 people that voted. So participation makes everything so much more fun. Oh, the questions went away. Okay. Well, then I guess we will take it for what it is, and we'll just go ahead.
We'll continue on, and we can try relaunching that second poll when the time comes. So we can stop sharing those and continue on. Okay. So first, let's all get on the same page and look at a couple of definitions here. So you'll see two definitions up here for food waste, and food waste is identified as a segment of food loss, which is what typically happens early on in the food chain during harvesting, processing, transportation. Food waste, on the other hand, is what we see further down the line on the consumer end, and in consumer facing establishments like grocery stores and restaurants, possibly due to imperfections, color, appearance of the food, and also a variety of different consumer behaviors that happen in the home and when dining out. So unfortunately, the United States leads the world in food waste. We throw away nearly 40% of all the food that is grown, and this number has doubled since the 1970s, equaling $161 billion nationwide. Now, what that means for a family of four, they can expect to throw away on average $1,500 a year in food waste, or about 300 pounds, which is quite a bit. While food waste happens all along the food chain, consumers certainly tip the scales as the leading contributors of wasted food in developed countries, more than restaurants and grocery stores combined. So as consumers, we're throwing away 25% of all foods purchased. So that's like going to the grocery store, picking up 4 bags of groceries, and then tossing one of those out when you get home. Per person, it's expected that we waste a pound of food per person every day, which is equal to 30% of daily calories consumed. And when looking at the different food groups, like fruits and vegetables and grains, fruits and vegetables are actually wasted the most at around half. So almost half of all fruits and vegetables end up in the trash. And this is followed by dairy and meat, and then meat mixed dishes. And as we are practicing social distancing and staying at home, we're probably preparing more food and cooking from scratch. So it's even more important that we try to use as much of the edible parts of the fruit and vegetables as possible. And of course, have a plan for our leftovers. So wasted food is a social problem. In 2018, we saw that 11.5% of US households experienced food insecurity at some time during the year. And this equals 37 million Americans, of which 11 million are children. And just as a reminder, food insecurity means a household does not have a certain amount of access to fresh food to support a healthy lifestyle. In research that was published from the University of Minnesota, they discovered that if 30% of US food loss were redistributed, it could provide the total diet for nearly 50 million people. And this is more than the number of Americans living in food insecure households. So there's a lot that we can do within our communities to get the food that would otherwise be wasted to people that need it the most. Wasted food is also an environmental problem. In the US, the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, estimates that more food reaches our landfills and incinerators than any other single material in our everyday trash, which accounts for about 21% of the waste stream. So a lot of this food too is in its original packaging. And if you ever get a chance, go visit your local landfill, and they can share a lot of information about food waste habits by neighborhood and district in your communities. It's really interesting. Reducing food waste will help the US address climate change, as 20% of total US methane emissions come from landfills. When food goes to waste, so do all of the resources used to grow, process, chill, and transport that food. So you might be thinking, why is there so much waste? Food is at the center of our celebrations, our life events, and is often an eye-catching feature of our social media accounts. But despite the celebration and gratitude, food waste remains high. Now, in looking at the research, they have indicated some possible causes for a lot of the waste at the consumer level. So things like lack of awareness and undervaluing of food, confusion over date labels, food spoilage due to improper storage, impulse and bulk purchases, as well as poor planning and over preparation. So I would like to get your opinion on this. So the next poll question I would like to hear from you on is, um, let's try to relaunch this poll. So I want to know what you think accounts for the most food waste at the consumer level. So I'm going to put this poll up here and hopefully everybody can see it. So it is the second question, and we'll get to the third question a little bit later on in the presentation. Okay, someone said the poll is not showing. Diane, would you be able to launch that poll for me, please?
I have relaunched it, so hopefully consumer or participants can see we have some people responding.
Oh, I see. Great. Thank you.
Yep. All right, we're going to give you about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to go ahead and enter their information.
Okay, so on my end, I can see that nearly 45% voted for poor planning and over preparation. And yes, that is definitely a huge contributor to food waste, as well as all of these other ones. And these are some of the things that we're going to be covering in the presentation today. So let's go ahead and keep on going. Okay. So in 2015, the United States Department of Agriculture and the Environmental Protection Agency announced the first ever domestic goal to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by the year 2030. By taking action on the U.S. 2030 food loss and waste reduction goal, the U.S. can help feed the hungry, save money for families and businesses, and protect the environment. One way they're wanting to measure their success of all the outreach they've been doing is to look at the amount of food waste per person. So they're looking at this in pounds. Baseline data from 2010 indicated that there were 218 pounds of food waste per person every year. And in 2030, they are hoping that that number will get down to 109 pounds of food waste per person every year. So we probably have a lot of work to do, but the more awareness we can raise and the more helpful tips that we can share with one another, we can definitely make this happen. Everyone can take action to reduce food loss and waste in the US, whether you are an individual, a business, a school, a nonprofit, or faith-based organization. This food recovery hierarchy, which a lot of you have probably seen, helps us think broadly about our waste recovery efforts. So this was developed by the EPA to help organizations and individuals prioritize diversion strategies for wasted food. As you can see, the top levels are most preferred because they create the most benefits, not only for the environment, but also for society and the economy. Most of the strategies that we'll talk about today fall under source reduction at the top. So as you're looking over this hierarchy, just take a few seconds to think about what strategies you use most often to reduce or divert food waste from the landfill. And if you only find yourself in the lowest level, think about some things that you might be able to do in the higher levels. So fortunately, most of the factors that lead to food waste can be easily remedied by simple changes in our food buying, preparation, and storage habits. So let's dig a little deeper into what we as consumers can do. An important driver of household food waste is consumer confusion over date labels. There are nearly 50 different date labels on food packages for food produced in the United States. Some examples include sell by, best before, use by, best if used by, and most of these dates refer to quality of food rather than safety concerns. One of the materials that I'll be sending out after the presentation is a expiration date handout that was created by the Riverbend Food Bank. And I really like this handout because it has detailed information on what various labels mean, and it has examples. So I'm going to share a few of those with you right now. So the sell by or use by date, this is a freshness date. Food is freshest by the date on the label, but still safe to eat after that date. So I'll give a couple of examples. One of those is eggs. So sometimes you'll see a use by date or a Julian date, which is the pack date on the carton. Raw eggs will maintain their best quality for about 3 weeks after the use by date or 4 to 5 weeks after the Julian date. If you plan on storing your eggs longer than 5 weeks, your best bet is to freeze them, and to do that, you want to freeze those eggs without the shell. Another example is milk. If you have been storing milk properly, it will remain drinkable for about 1 week after the sell-by date. Another label you'll be seeing a lot is the best by or best if used by date. This is also a quality date. So food has the best quality if eaten by this date. You can eat acidic canned foods, which would be things like tomatoes and pineapples, for 12 to 18 months after this date. You can eat non-acidic canned foods, so things like canned soup or vegetables, up to 2 to 5 years after this date. And if you are someone who simply just cannot get over eating food past the date, I always like to think back to what our local food bank suggests. And they say, think of that date on the can not as a throwaway date, but as a donate by date. So if you have a lot of canned foods in your house that may be slightly past the date, think about donating those instead of throwing those away, because those can help feed a lot of people in the community. And the last one I'd like to share is the EXP date. So this is a true expiration date. And after this date, the food is not safe to eat and should be thrown away. Examples are baby food and infant formula. So when I was talking about the eggs and milk, there are other types of foods that you may be having questions about. So I would encourage you to visit the website stilltasty.com, and they have a lot of great information on shelf life past the date for various foods in different categories. So check that out for more information. These are some highlights from the Consumer Perceptions of Date Labels. It was a national survey conducted in 2016 from the Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation. And they wanted to find out how consumers are using date labels to make decisions when discarding food. And a couple highlights I wanted to share was that over a third of consumers wrongly think that date labels are federally regulated, and only 1% correctly said they are regulated for specific foods. And this is true. The only food for which date labels are regulated federally is for baby food and infant formula. All other foods are regulated at the state level or not at all, depending on your state. And also younger consumers, so those aged 18 to 34, are most likely to always discard foods past the use by date, whereas baby boomers are least likely to do so. And this makes sense, right? So there was a new bill that was introduced in 2019 called the Food Date Labeling Act. So it would do two important things. It would reduce the available labeling language to 2 phrases, so going from nearly 50 down to 2. It would use best if used by for quality and used by for safety. And it would also eliminate state laws that ban the sale or donation of food past the quality date. And in Illinois, the only restriction on selling past the date is for eggs. Now, if you are interested in looking at the food policy laws in your state, you can go to the website refed.com. There you will find a really nice interactive map and you can search for those food policies by state. So now we're going to move into some smart storage strategies. There are 3 factors to consider when deciding what to store where in your fridge. You want to think about food safety, temperature, and humidity. Where you store food in the fridge can have quite an impact on its shelf life. Most refrigerators have cold and hot spots with temperatures ranging from around 33 to 39 degrees or so. In general, the back of the bottom shelf, where cooler, heavier air falls to, and the back of the top shelf, closest to the fan and condenser, are the coldest spots, while the middle of the door is going to be your warmest spot. So how you organize your food in the fridge should be based on how cold it needs to be kept. For maximum storage life, your fridge should be set to hold a minimum of 34 and should not rise above 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is an example of what you could do in your refrigerator on the different levels. It's a good idea to always store your raw meat and poultry and fish on the bottom shelf so you don't have any raw meat drippings drip down onto your ready-to-eat foods or produce. I wanted to also share a couple of specific food reminders. So I've been going to the grocery store and noticed that a lot of people are buying extra milk and cheese. So if you have a lot of extra milk and cheese in your home, there's a couple of things you can do to extend the shelf life of those items. So for cheese, if you find that it's getting moldy before you reach the end of the block, it's a good idea to unwrap the cheese from the plastic and then rewrap it in wax paper to allow for breathing, since it doesn't really like to be right against that plastic. And for milk can be frozen for quite a long time. And when you're ready to thaw it, if it doesn't come out to the perfect consistency, you can just stick it in the blender and it'll be good as new. Humidity plays a role in the freshness of our vegetables. The crisper drawer in the bottom of your fridge, these are designed to prevent fresh, cold air from circulating into them. Vegetables naturally emit a bit of energy as they go about their normal energy cycles, heating up the space in the drawer. Thus, it retains more moisture in there. Moist air can help prevent vegetables from shriveling or drying out. Most crisper drawers have a slider that controls the ventilation so that you can adjust the moisture level inside that drawer. The key is to maximize the moisture to maximize the shelf life of those vegetables. Just make sure that you don't wash your vegetables before putting them in the drawer, because this can speed up the spoiling process. If you notice that your produce begins to rot after just a few days, you could be storing incompatible fruits and vegetables together. So it's always a good idea to keep those separated. So you're going to have some produce, like gas releasers. They emit ethylene gas, so all of your fruits. You want to keep those stored separately. I usually put those in my fresh drawer away from the gas-sensitive produce, the vegetables. I'll keep those completely separated in the refrigerator and on the counter as well. And for your herbs, a really good tip to keep them lasting longer is to remove them from the produce bag when you get home, wrap them in a paper towel, which will help soak up some of that moisture, and they won't get brown and slimy. And this is something that I have really liked to do. I also have a handout I'll be sharing after the presentation with more specific information on storing fresh fruits and vegetables for shelf life. And then the fridge door, this is the best place to store frequently used items and those that don't require the coldest temperature. So things like butter, condiments, dressings, other drinks. It's just not an ideal place for milk and eggs. It's a little too warm. One way to extend the life of food beyond its date is to freeze it. It's like pushing the pause button on your food. Anything you put into the freezer will be safe indefinitely, but over time, the quality will diminish. And there's some things you can do to help preserve the quality of that frozen food long term. One of those things you can do is to freeze your food flat. I like to do this in freezer bags. I'll go ahead and portion my food into freezer bags, and I'll try to spread them out in the freezer so they're not stacked one on top of the other. This allows the cold air to circulate around the bags, allowing for a quicker freeze. And the faster it freezes, then you will have less large ice crystals, which will diminish the quality when it then thaws later. This also helps to prevent freezer burn and greatly cuts down on defrosting time. You can also use cookie sheets to help freeze certain foods. So you may be thinking about going out to pick blueberries this spring. So when you get home, you have a lot of blueberries, you want to freeze some. I like to freeze them on a cookie sheet, and then after an hour or so, I'll place them in another container or a freezer bag, which allows for easy pour later on. Other things you might want to throw into your freezer, especially as the weather warms up, are foods that are prone to going rancid. So foods that are high in fat. So think nuts, butters, whole grain flours, seeds like flaxseed and chia, and then avocados can be frozen as well. And make sure you label everything. It's a good idea that all of your packages have the contents and the dates written on them, because nobody wants UFOs or unidentified frozen objects flying around in their freezer. And if you have a deep freeze, then you'll be able to freeze a lot more products that way. The main criteria for evaluating food safety is the amount of time food spends in the danger zone. So you never want to leave food out of refrigeration over 2 hours, otherwise it will be entering the danger zone, which is 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. This is where bacteria grow rapidly, and they can double in number in as little as 20 minutes. For the most part, you can trust your senses to know when food has gone bad, but when in doubt, it's a good idea to throw it out. For more information on food safety steps, you can visit foodsafety.gov, and there you will find the Food Keeper app, which was developed by USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service with Cornell University. And this will provide information on food and beverage storage, which will help you maximize freshness and quality of items long term. Another food rescue strategy is to get creative and have a plan for your leftovers. But if you're not one to eat leftovers, then eating out multiple times a week or preparing extra large meals could lead to a lot of potential waste. So a couple of strategies you can use when eating out: you can share entrees, or if it's dinner, you can ask for the lunch menu, which oftentimes has smaller portions of your favorite items. At home, you can make smaller amounts by cutting the recipe in half or sending food home with guests after a dinner party. And even using smaller plates can have a huge impact. In a Danish study, participants that used 10% smaller plates reduced their food waste by 26%. So that's really good. I like to think of leftovers as ingredients, and this is something that I will do at the beginning of the week when I'm planning my meals. I'll think, all right, what am I going to have leftovers of this week, and how can I incorporate those into other meals I might be making? So maybe I will roast a large pan of vegetables, and instead of eating that as a side every night, which could be boring, I might throw those into a frittata and have a new experience that way. You can dedicate a leftovers night. So if you find your fridge or freezer stuffed to the gills with leftover food, you can commit to eating down the fridge one night a week to ensure none of it goes to waste. You can turn your dinner into lunch, which is something I do since there aren't a lot of options around my office. I always cook a little bit extra for dinner, so I know I have something good to bring for lunch the next day. You can also stash your vegetable scraps. So in this photo, you can see that there is a freezer bag with lots of different little scraps of vegetables from previous meal preparations. You can see peels of carrots, potatoes, tops of celery, little bits of garlic. So you would just keep this bag in your freezer, and then instead of throwing your scraps in the trash, keep adding it to this bag. And when it's full, throw those in a pot, cover it with water, add a few herbs, different spices, let it simmer for a couple hours, and then you have a delicious homemade vegetable broth that you can use for soups or stews that week. And you can even portion and store it in your freezer for meals another day. And portioning and storing is a great technique too, especially if you are someone who is just cooking for 1 or 2 people. Um, you can find a lot of good deals in those extra large sizes at the grocery store, but if you don't have a lot of people to cook for, that could be a potential for waste. So learning how to portion and store and create freezer meals will really work to your benefit. Something that has really helped me over the years is to create a weekly meal plan. And then I like to make a grocery list based on the specific ingredients I need. This helps ensure we use what we buy. And research has shown that shoppers who use and stick to lists have lower grocery bills and make fewer shopping trips throughout the month. It's also helpful if you keep some sort of inventory of the food you have in your kitchen, in your pantry, in your fridge and freezer. This just helps ensure that you don't buy duplicate items when you are going to the grocery store, and it helps you shop the refrigerator first. So you have your list, you're ready to go. Just take one quick look in the fridge before heading out to the grocery store. The second bullet there talks about not shopping on an empty stomach, which is good advice because if we're hungry, we're more likely to purchase foods that we may not necessarily need. So a lot of impulse purchasing goes on. So eating maybe a little trail mix or an apple can help curb your appetite. And then third bullet talks about skipping the carts and scrutinizing deals. So we know that bigger carts call us to fill them. So if possible, try shopping with one of those smaller carts or even a hand basket, which can help improve your grocery store discipline. And be wary of those deals. So a lot of times grocery stores will put products on sale that are near the end of their life cycle. So like fruits and vegetables, maybe it's a 2-for-1 deal. So just make sure you have a plan for all of this produce before you get home, since we know produce, almost half of it ends up in the trash. And actually, bananas and apples are 2 of the most wasted fruits. And there's a lot we can do with produce that's nearing the end of its life cycle. The first thing I think of is breads and muffins. So I will take bananas and apples that are getting too ripe, puree them, and then I can add those to breads and muffins and cookies to help reduce some of the fat content. And I also like to freeze bananas without the skin, which are really good for future smoothies. Aside from efficient cooking, smart storage, and understanding date labels, there are several other things that we can do to keep food out of the landfill. The first thing here is all about learning how to compost. Illinois Extension's Composting Central website has a lot of great resources for composting livestock manure, food scraps, and yard waste. So if you're thinking you might want to try composting at your home, there's lots of different models. There's some that you can keep in your kitchen. There's bigger models that will be great for outside. And there's even some information on how to create your own with a few simple materials. So go check that out if you're interested in composting. Something else you can do is learn how to preserve your food. So canning is a great option, especially this time of year. We're going to have a lot of great produce coming out at the farmers markets, and it's always fun to learn how to can. We do offer workshops, so keep an eye out for those this summer and fall. And I have a feeling we're going to see a surge in these since a lot of people have had the unfortunate experience of semi-empty grocery stores this spring. And then donation of food is also a plus. So when would be a good time to donate food? Well, if it's been sitting in your cupboard and you don't intend to eat it, or maybe it's slightly past the date. If you have extras from an event or a party, just make sure that food has not been served or set out and had hands in it, and it's been kept safe with proper internal temperatures. You can certainly donate that food. Food donations are still being accepted by nonprofit hunger relief agencies at this time. Just make sure you contact your local food banks and pantries to find out what is accepted and when they take donations, since it's going to vary by location. And just remember, we all can make a difference by making small shifts in how we shop, store, and prepare. We can save money and all of the valuable resources that went in to grow that delicious food. I have one more poll question for you. And you might have answered it already, but if not, go ahead and take a second to answer this next poll question. Diane, if you could please share that poll question again. So I'm just curious, it's the third one. Which type of food do you find yourself throwing away more often than others? And the last time we had put this poll up, I had seen vegetables was the number one listed, but we'll see what comes up now. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to vote on these again. So it looks like vegetables was the leading wasted food, which is in line with what the research tells us, fruits and vegetables. And there's a lot of different things we can do with the produce. If you really aren't sure how much food you are throwing away in your household, a good place to start is by taking this food waste challenge, which was developed by the Environmental Protection Agency. This is a screenshot of what the PDF looks like. For the first 2 weeks, you simply measure your food waste and keep track of why that food ended up in the trash. Then weeks 3 through 5, you implement some new strategies to divert that waste and then record your results. So a lot of the strategies that they recommend are the same ones that we covered in today's presentation. So one example I would like to share is when I took this challenge, I noticed that I was throwing away a lot of the mixed salad greens, the pre-washed kind that comes in the clamshell. And I would get the larger container, the $5 one. And I was like, man, I really need to do something to change this habit because I like salad. I eat a lot of lettuce. And so I decided to switch to a spinach or kale, something that has a longer shelf life than the mixed salad greens. Because really, after a few days, it would start to get brown and slimy. And now I waste a lot less salad over the month. And this may seem really simple, but it's the small habits that are going to have the most impact. And over time, we'll end up saving a lot of money and preventing a lot of food waste in our household. And this toolkit has actually been linked to a 25% reduction in household wasted food. So I definitely encourage everyone to check this out. Here's a list of the additional resources that I will be emailing you following this presentation. The first one is a PDF of the Food Waste Challenge that I just mentioned. The second one is the Food Rescue at Home booklet, and this includes information from today's presentation as well as ideas for root to stock cooking, so you're eating more of the edible parts of the plant you may not be accustomed to, as well as food preservation information. The third one is the expiration date handout I referenced earlier that was created by the Riverbend Food Bank. And lastly, there is the handout on how to properly store fresh fruits and vegetables to keep them lasting longer. And then in the little box at the bottom, it says 30 Days of Food Rescue. This is a social media campaign that we are putting out right now. It's going on during the month of April, which is Winning on Reducing Food Waste Month. And there is a new graphic for each day of the month with tips for consumers to reduce food waste at home. So I've been sharing these graphics on our unit's Facebook page, which you can find by searching for UI extension HMRS, which stands for Henry Mercer, Rock Island, and Stark. So if you would like to go check that out, you can share those graphics and help spread the word. And if you would rather have a downloadable link to access all of those graphics for your own personal use, I'd be happy to share that with you. Just email me after the presentation and I can get those to you. And this is the graphic that was shared today for April 8th. These are some of my sources cited here. Does anybody have any questions at this time?
All right, Kristen, we have a few questions. So our first question would be, would you suggest putting meats in the crisper, or would you put them on a shelf if that's how your refrigerator is set up?
Meats?
Mm-hmm.
I guess it depends on your refrigerator, I know there's lots of different models now, but generally in mine, I like to keep my raw meats on the bottom shelf on a plate just to make sure none of those drippings seep down into the drawers. And then I keep my fruits in one drawer in the fresh drawer, and I keep my vegetables in the crisper drawer.
All right. So I shared the extension Understanding Food Packaging Dates and Labels. I shared that in our chat box as that was recently reconfigured and sent out. Also, our next question is, when freezing milk, do you leave it sealed or remove the cap to account for expansion? And then I went ahead and shared the handout on what food items freeze well.
Mm-hmm.
And so the freezing, they recommend putting it into a container in which allows for expansion, and you need a 1-inch headspace. So some of those plastic containers that milk gets frozen in, they have indented sides, so that may accommodate for the milk expansion, but really the recommendation is making sure you have at least 1-inch headspace in order to allow for that expansion.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And anything liquid that you are putting into the freezer, you want to make sure there's some headspace to allow for expansion of those liquids. So good points.
All right, another question. They say that when they this comes from Dana, and she says when she freezes the milk, it looks yellow. And then when thawed, it probably looks normal. So you had mentioned something about putting it in the blender.
Yeah, sometimes the consistency is a little off, so you can blend it and then it'll fix that problem.
And that probably has to do with the fat content and how the fat can separate out during the freezing process. Mm-hmm. So when you put it in the blender and you're re-emulsifying it, then it can, become a more normal consistency.
I just saw that Josephine says that she gives her fruit and veggie scraps to her coworkers' chickens. Yes, that is a great technique. If you have chickens, you can certainly give those scraps to them as well. They'd be very happy, I'm sure.
Our next question is, how long is milk good for after it's been frozen?
From what I've seen, it said 3 weeks in the freezer for maximum quality and freshness.
You mentioned raw eggs should be stored on the middle shelf in the refrigerator. Should they not be stored on the bottom shelf with raw meat?
I think I mentioned that they shouldn't be stored in the door because the door is the warmest part. So you can, if you'd like to store them on the bottom with the meat, that would be a great place to store them as well because it's going to be colder down there.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I understand that washing produce makes it deteriorate more quickly, but in today's age, isn't it better not to spread germs to other products?
When it comes to produce, you probably brought it home in a produce bag of some sort. You can keep it in the produce bag or remove it and put it into a different like zipper type lock bag. That way they're going to be separated from each other in the drawer. But you definitely don't want to wash that produce because of the moisture content will speed up the decaying process there in the fridge.
Our next question comes from Ashley. And the question is it true that canned foods stored properly are safe indefinitely?
The recommendation that I received from the local food bank is several years past the date, but not indefinitely. Do you have anything else that you've read, Diane, on that?
I have not. And food truly does have expiration dates. So I would follow the recommendations.
And I would say, too, that there's a difference between commercially canned and home canned. If you're home canning, that recommendation is going to be a lot less shorter of a window than the commercially canned produce or food. Okay, so I'm going to continue on here. I've got a couple more slides, and we can take some more questions in just a moment. Okay, so before you log off today, I do have one ask for you. We have a really, really quick survey, and Diane will be nice enough to put that in the chat box for me, right, Diane? And so it'll take probably a couple minutes to fill that out. And once you do, I'll get a notification with your email, and then I will send you all of those resources that I just mentioned. And I just want to thank everybody so much for tuning in and taking this hour out of their day. It's very, very sunny here, so I can't wait to get outside and go for a walk. And I hope everyone is doing well. And I hope we see you again at another one of our webinars. Next week, Wednesday, April 15th at 1 is going to be Emotional Eating, Understanding How Stress Impacts Hunger and Appetite. And that presentation will be conducted by Diane Reinhold. So we hope to see you there. And again, that survey link is in the chat box. I will also send an email out to everyone with that link in case you don't have time to fill it out right now. So I just wanted to mention those few things before people started jumping off. Were there any other additional questions, Diane, that I did not get a chance to answer yet?
So yes, we have one question, and it says, will you be giving us the recorded link? So hopefully hopefully in a week, we will be able to have this posted to our YouTube channel for the University of Illinois Extension. And I believe if you check that website, you'll be able to find it, and we will do our best to get that out when we send out our additional resources.
Thank you, Diane. All right, if there's no other questions, then I guess we can go ahead and end the meeting. So thank you again, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope you stay well. Bye-bye.